So officially, hello and welcome. I'm Rivera Sun. I am a trainer with Bene Campaign Nonviolence, and I used to do a lot of social media work and programs coordination for them until very recently when I made a shift to get to write full-time as an author, which is very exciting and opens up some possibilities of work positions for other people at Campaign Nonviolence, which is great. So this is the second in Bene Campaign Nonviolence's Book of the Month Club. The first one was Ken Budigan's Nonviolent Lives. The one coming up next is David Hartso's Waging Peace. And then you can check out the link in the sidebar to find the whole schedule of all the books coming up. It's a pretty great selection covering both books of faith, fiction, nonfiction, historical nonviolence, contemporary nonviolence, lots of good material to dig into there. And of course, these monthly author Q&As, which are pretty special. It's not every day you get to chat with your fellow authors or your favorite authors. So tonight is a Q&A. So you're going to get to ask questions. And because it's a smaller group of people, I'm hoping that you will prepare questions and you will ask questions because that'll make it lively and very interesting. And as I said in the email today, there is no question too large or too small. So ask away and don't be shy. And I'm very happy to field them. I just want to open with a few brief remarks about The Way Between. It does have a new cover. The first edition actually came out, and we're all very excited about that. It is a community published book, which means that it's supported by people like us who bring it through the publishing phase. And it's a novel that tries to turn the genre of action and adventure on its head. Usually in that genre, we're delivered nonstop advocacy of war, sword fighting, violence. It's very rare to find an action adventure story that doesn't promote violence, actually. Although most of us have been so trained in the culture of violence that we don't see it that way. We don't think of The Lord of the Rings as an ode to violent conflict. We think it's about conflict, and obviously violence must be necessary. But this really reflects kind of the thinking of former centuries and doesn't incorporate the new knowledge that we have and has been hard won by millions of people all around the world about the field of active nonviolence and peace building or peace skills, that we now have new knowledge as human beings that turns those old paradigms of violence completely on their head. And a good example of this is the groundbreaking work of Erica Chenoweth and Maria J. Stephan, who compared violent and nonviolent conflicts in similar situations, such as overturning a government regime, expelling a foreign invasion, or stopping, ousting a foreign occupation. And they found that in those circumstances, nonviolent action is not only succeeding, it's succeeding twice as often as violence, in a third of the amount of the time, with a fraction of the casualties. And if we know this, if this is statistical, empirical fact, then those of us who work in the field of fiction, in movies, in writing about conflict, in policymaking, everything, should really take a pause and reflect and rethink what we're advocating for and promoting in our field. And for me, that's the field of novels, of fiction. And so I went back and I reflected upon what did I read growing up? What were my favorite stories? And I actually loved, sword swinging women warrior type characters, where they had to dress up as boys and pretend to be soldiers until they got ousted and became the women champion of the world, because that was the new narrative of women's empowerment of the day. But what we've really found in the reality of the world is that empowerment doesn't actually come through the brunt of a sword or the barrel of a gun. Empowerment comes through engaging the the ability to non-cooperate, to organize, to use civil disobedience, to make change with these tools of nonviolent action. And to really wage peace in the deepest sense of those words, to de-escalate conflicts, and to use the skills that the field of peace building has really articulated over the years. And our friend David Hartsoe, who's on this call, is very familiar with that in the context of nonviolent peace force and unarmed peacekeeping. So my goal with The Way Between was to weave these new knowledges that we have, these things that have been rising up in humanity's experience and have just come to a point of consciousness breakthrough, and put them into an action adventure story that has all those bells and whistles that we love. You know, the mystery, the intrigue, the super awesome girl heroine, the fantastical land that we've never been to. It's totally mythological. The challenges, the secrets, the almost Karate Kid style, learning of a new, I guess, non-martial art form called Azar, The Way Between. And to see if a novel like this could give our kids and ourselves and our elders a taste of the skills that so many of us are learning to embody in the world today. And what I've found since the book has been in circulation, which has been in its early advanced reader copies since November, and in the first edition since March, is that there's a magic to this book, something I didn't expect at all. I mean, I expected there to be kickback. I expected people to be like, oh no, this will never work. But what I've found is all these stories of people, a lot of older people who read the book and tell me they're crying on page 71. Or they just read it avidly and they handed it to their 14-year-old. Or one mom who posted a picture on Facebook of her 4-year-old son looking at a river and told me that they were looking at the river right before they read the scene together at night in The Way Between, where she's tossed in the river to follow the way between the flowing of the river. And that she's reading this book to her son because she knows it will influence his life. As an author, those are the stories that really make your heart move very deeply and feel very honored at this fairly magical process that is a novel and a reader. And I'm just seeing this novel do miraculous things I didn't expect, and become a way of people talking about this subject matter, in that people will say, I am actively trying to follow the way between in my workplace. Or I am looking for Azar, which is the made-up name for the way between, or the third choice between fight and flight, which we know as active nonviolence. And so it's magical, it's amazing, and it's a real gift to have written this book and to watch it start its transformational journey in the world. And I just honor you guys in Pace Bene for making this moment of the journey possible, where we can ask questions and dig into the subject matter together. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you guys.
I have a question, and I just popped in onto Amazon, and I see that I downloaded a sample of the book, and I'm pleased to see that it's a very affordable $9.99 here in Canada. So that's how I will acquire it, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with my son in particular, who is 14 years old now. And he's, the testosterone is flowing, and he's tends to sometimes get a little bit exuberant and maybe a bit aggressive in his reaction. So I think it'd be instructional for both of us to read it. I was wondering, again, I apologize, I have not read it, but do you delve into the concept of matriarchy versus patriarchy.
Yes. Oh.
So I just muted Laverne for a moment because I think you're talking to someone else, but I'll unmute you in a second after I answer Miles' question. So in a way, yes, in that there are three dominant cultures in the land of the Way-Between, or the land in which it takes place. There's the Marianan culture, which is an interesting mix, I would say, of matriarchy and patriarchy. It has had traditionally female monarchical rulers. It has passed through the female line. But it is also fairly patriarchal in its operation in that it is an extreme war culture. It is a dominator culture, as bell hooks would say, to kind of get out of the dualistic mind frame. But then the Fantin, which are a forest-dwelling people, are an extreme matriarchy, when that all their leaders are women. The tribe is organized by women, and their stance, and this is not, to say that matriarchies or patriarchies are inherently more or less passive or violent. But this particular culture, their stance is non-involvement, to back off from violent conflict. They find violent conflict completely repulsive, like on a visceral level. The third culture is the desert people, and they are a patriarchy. This is a little spoiler alert for the third book in the series, because it is a series. They do have some rather severe gender inequalities brewing, in which, for reasons based on the valuing of men for their ability to fight the Marianans, they've devalued the women in their society, and the women also have a value to them as water slaves to sell to the Marianans, who control all the water. So obviously these are major social justice issues that we meet, challenge, confront, and transform through the course of the books. I would never want to leave anyone thinking I'm advocating those things. But I think one of the goals in the series is to bring up a wide variety of incarnations of gender dynamics. Both patriarchies and matriarchies, but also dominators and democracies, like real participatory democracies, not the charade that we have. And then also to talk about, the roles of women, the roles of men within society. And I have to say, having written more realistic social justice fiction, like the Dandelion Insurrection or Billionaire Buddha, which are set in the United States, going into a totally fantastical landscape gives you a lot of elbow room for actually bringing up these issues and dealing with them and letting people observe them in a non-defensive way, so that they can really see the dynamics and see what's unfolding for better or for worse. So that's my 2 cents on that, and you'll read more in the book. Laverne, I just unmuted you in case you were asking a question and I interrupted that question.
Oh, you were fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Rivera, I'm wondering if you can share any more about kind of the inspiration for this book, and the progression, like you were just saying, of these kind of novels set in today, and now moving into this novel set into the fanciful world, and how that idea kind of came about.
So it's kind of funny. While I was writing all these social protest novels, I would have one story in the back of my head for those days when I just couldn't deal with any more social justice issues, right? So we all have those little things that we do. We watch movies, or we go soak in the hot tub, or whatever it is. For me, I spin stories in my mind. And Ariara and the Way-Between was the story I would spin when I needed a break from the grind of paying attention to reality. But and this has been going on for many years, actually, but as I learned more about active nonviolence and learned more about unarmed peacekeeping, peace building skills, conflict resolution, all this dimension of the tools and resources we have at our disposal, those started to weave into the story too. And they had to, because there are major injustices in the world that Ariara lives in. There's been war constantly with the desert people for the living history of the two kingdoms. She's learning the way between, which is a nonviolent martial arts form similar to Aikido, but also a way of life and a practice in the midst of a training monastery for armed violent conflict, monks and warriors. And so these were skills that she actually needed as a young child to navigate things like the bully that she encounters, or the fact that war is on the verge of breaking out again with the desert people. So that's the origin of this. Yeah, I see that.
You still hear me? Oh.
Hello.
Oh, good, good. We got you.
Right, you did. So we'll navigate this storm by switching to our good old trusty landline.
Great, thanks, Rivera. So I don't know if you can. Are you able to kind of continue your thoughts there on the progression of this novel?
Sure. So just to recap, the skills that I was learning in real life became woven into the story of this fictional fantasy because they were needed. The world that she lived in needed them just as much as the world that we live in needs them. And so I would say that one of the things, as I was saying, in a fantasy world is that it becomes a prism or a lens on our reality. And you can actually talk about really tough subjects in a fantastical world that you could have, that you would have difficulty touching here in the United States. For example, many of my friends who are veterans for peace they were real sources of inspiration for this book. The stories that they tell, their life journeys, their experience directly being a part of the war culture and now taking a stand against it. And so in the fictional story, Shu Len, the great warrior of the nation, goes through experiences that are very similar to what all soldiers and warriors experience: the PTSD, the understanding that they have been used for political purposes that they may not support, that at times there may have been violent conflict that they did support, but there might have been times when they didn't. And as books like Catch-22 or many of the anti-war books have shown us over and over again, the US culture, at any rate, has a very difficult time swallowing these stories. It directly confronts their addiction to war and their uncritiqued, almost rabid support of war at all costs. War night and day, warriors and soldiers and veterans being honored always. And in the fictional way between, what emerges is the opportunity for the stories and the perspectives that I hear from my friends and veterans for peace to be heard in a fictional story, but also to be really to allow the emotion to really come to the surface, or the drama of the scene to carry us through that, to evoke our human empathy and understanding. And so I think what can be accomplished in the book is very powerful, and I think it's a wonderful vehicle for saying things that have difficulty being said in our current culture.
Thanks, Rivera.
Rivera, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, David.
I just want to thank you for all your work in writing both these books. Uh, as I think all of us on this call know, the addiction to war and violence and threats of violence is a very heavy addiction that has really what's the right word? Which is just so prevalent in our culture, in our media, and our whole way of being. And my understanding is that your hope is that through these novels, sharing how people are somehow getting beyond that addiction and how they relate to each other and how they try to resolve conflicts can be a model that can inspire hopefully millions of people, that there are different ways to, we don't have to continue in this addiction for our whole lives. But I was just wondering if you could share more, both kind of your philosophy, your thinking about that, and also just share some more of the feedback you've been getting from people that is, wow, this is, there are better ways than this old way that we've been wedded to for so long.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, David. I really appreciate that. Well, I guess I'm of the era where Harry Potter was the book of the year. I mean, you would literally wait every year for the new Harry Potter book to come out, and everybody read them all together. And it became like a lingo, a lingo of story that we all shared in together. And I think you probably know from your own work, David, that oftentimes one of our biggest hangups or challenges in working for peace and active nonviolence is that people don't know their options, that they're fed the mythologies of the culture of war and violence in nearly every movie, every news report, every oftentimes classes that they're attending at school from kindergarten all the way up through graduating college. That's true for our friend Erica Chenoweth, who did such groundbreaking work. Her experience was all with violent conflict studies until such time as she was challenged to compare nonviolent campaigns to violent ones. And so I think one of the things that we're up against is that the culture of war is so unchallenged and almost unseen, because we don't recognize that when the hero resolves the scene by slaying the villain, or the villain is accidentally slain, which is the PC version of that, or that the answer to the conflict in the story we're watching in a movie or in a book is to have a battle either of individuals or societies, and the winner is obviously right, and usually that involves our protagonist. We don't realize that this is a form of cultural indoctrination that begins at a very young age with fairy tales and continues all the way on up to when we're adults and we're watching evening news. And it's important to break up or literally intervene in that programming, and to expose people to these ideas that nonviolent struggle and active nonviolence and peace skills are not just airy-fairy concepts. They're vital, they're alive, they're effective, they're transformative, and they work. And they actually work better than violence in almost every situation that they can be applied in. And what really occurred to me as I was writing Aria, or The Way Between, which is one of 7 in a series, is that if Harry Potter could break through our consciousness to the point that all of us know who Harry Potter is. I don't have to explain that. Then what happens when active nonviolence goes mainstream on that level? What happens when a plucky little red-headed heroine becomes known as much as Harry Potter? Then we start to have a game changer globally and societally, where the unchallenged assumptions of the war culture have to actually stand up for themselves. They're going to have to prove that they're actually better, and we know from the statistics that they are not. And the skills of active nonviolence and peace building get a chance to speak to the hearts and the minds of the people. They get a chance, finally, on what is still not a level playing field whatsoever, but a chance to speak for themselves in the consciousness of the people. And I think it's pretty powerful to reflect on the idea that Ariara is 10 years old when this series starts. By the time it ends, she'll be nearly 20. And what happens when our 10-year-olds today read one book a year until they're 17? And they come flying out the other side of these stories that deal with a large number of social injustices, including war culture, gender inequalities, slavery, environmental issues, monarchies versus democracies, class struggles. It seems so impossible that a single series could cover them all, but in reality, in our own world today, we are looking at the need to address multiple issues that intersect in powerful and profound ways. So if this is happening in a fictional world, I believe it's just a reflection of the work that we need to do in our real world. But what happens when our young people or our old people, anybody comes flying out the other end of that series is, I don't think you can go on a journey like that without being transformed in some way. And I believe that once we get to the other side of that journey, we're going to be in a place that we can hardly imagine today. Because our children grow up on The Lord of the Rings, and our children grow up on Lloyd Alexander, who I adore. We grow up on Alana, the Lioness series. And we grow up on, let me just name them, the Hunger Games and the Divergent series, which feature women as assassins and killers, regrettably so. And that's always the excuse to glorify violence and warfare. I think about my own niece who's 8 years old, and what's going to happen when she gets to be old enough to read the Hunger Games and thinks she should be like Katniss Everdeen and, tough enough to survive in the Hunger Games and kill other children. That's my version of a nightmare. And so I thought that was part of the origins of this book as well, is that I have some young people in my family that I really deeply care about, and I don't want them to think that Katniss Everdeen and the Hunger Games is their only option, their only role model, their only hero. So I'm going to pause there for a minute and check to see if my internet connection is back. So if you'll just bear with me for 30 seconds, we'll get to the next question.
Will do. Thanks, Rivera.
Thank you.
Ryan, it's Laverne.
Yes. Yes, hi, Laverne.
Hi, I just want to tell you.
Can anybody hear me? This is Savannah.
Savannah, yes, we can hear you, but hold on.
Oh, okay.
Yep,
I just want to, I tried to press 1. I'd like to get in the stack to say something. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we'll call on you in just a few minutes. But Laverne?
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't
that,
figure out how to get in.
Okay. All right, Laverne?
when I just went on now, I noticed that you had sent what you usually send a Pache Bene form.
Yes.
And the links are active on that.
Okay,
Where
good.
the links weren't active is on what Rivera sent from probably a different source. Those are the ones that weren't active. And what I'm noticing on the one you sent, I could get Rivera's books, but I can't get David's. I think what I remember on hers was it said if I clicked on that, I could get all the books. And that's not on your link yet.
I'll send you all that information, Laverne, and see if we can work that out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
But I did want to tell you that what you sent does have links. It works.
Oh, good. Good. Thank you. And Rivera Savannah had a question she'd like to ask. It looks like your video's working now, correct?
Great. Yeah.
Okay.
Kudos to Zoom, which I think kept recording this session even as the power went out somehow. Kind of like a kind of a technical miracle. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I'm impressed. Laverne.
Savannah has a
Oh,
question.
Savannah, sorry.
Oh, hi. Well, I wanted, not so much a question, but I wanted to respond to the gentleman with the 14-year-old boy that lives in Canada.
Yes.
Many Native Americans, for boys and girls, they have rites of passage through stories and physical activities and certain ceremonies. And they tell them what to expect, and through those variety of methods, teach them how to make the decisions about their life for more than because of all the hormonal changes. And this knowledge has been suppressed, but there are many writings about things that can help guide you in addition to Rivera's book.
Thank you. I'll look into that.
And if you want some resources, you can have it. Rivera ask me to send them through her to you.
Thank you very much. That you mentioned Indigenous culture. It's an area that I've sadly just recently, in the last year or so, really pursued to explore the cultures of the First Nations in Canada and also in the United States. And I just learned something fascinating the other day, and it relates to what Rivera was talking about with respect to her fictional world, in that she can explore different paradigms of thought and culture, the way things get done. Our local, our First Nations in the Calgary area are the Blackfoot tribe, and this nation of Indigenous people consists of Tsuut'ina, Piikani, and several other bands, and extends into Montana. And the fascinating thing I learned was that they do not even have a word really that translates to our word thank you. They don't have a phrase thank you because their culture is one of such sharing that they traditionally never had to actually say thank you to one another, because it was just the way they do business. As opposed to our culture, which Henry Giraud, if you're interested, just recently wrote an article called The Culture of Cruelty in Trump's America. Very powerful piece. But to contrast, the hustle that we value as our economic paradigm as compared to the traditional sharing approach of Indigenous people, where they didn't even have the word thank you, is really amazing to me.
Miles, if I can get in there.
So we take so much for granted. And so, Rivera, I wanted to ask you, what age you recommend for this book, like in grammar school or something?
Mm-hmm. Well, I started out thinking that it would be a great book for 10-year-olds since the protagonist was 10, and then all these 60 and 70-year-olds read it and could not stop reading it and loved it. So I had to expand my age range in there. And as I said, my friend was reading it to her 4-year-old, and my sister read it to her 6-year-old. So, so far so good, like positive responses from all age categories. I would say that I did try to make the protagonist story relevant to both, our older minds and also to the 10-year-old's perspective. And I've heard some pretty good feedback that I'm accomplishing that. I did have a 5th grade teacher, Robin Wildman, actually, who many of you know, who is one one of the co-founders of the nation's first nonviolence school. She read the book and loved it and recommends it to many people. And so I did call upon a few people to, check it out for age appropriateness. And I think we're doing all right. So I would say it's pretty good for all ages. It's especially has a special insight for 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds. And then younger than that, it just depends on who the kid is you're talking about, whether they read it on their own or you read it to them. But I have heard it's enjoyable even for those littler guys, which I'm pretty impressed of.
Well, would you consider a picture book with the story to counteract so much before children are aware they're being impacted in their beliefs, like 5 and 6, and just to get them thinking that there's an alternative way to look at situations. And so it would have to be simplified, and pictures are always great, because when the children hear the book, they can read the pictures, and even if they can't read formally, they can do the story in their heads with the pictures. So that would be something, maybe, I don't know if you'd want to consider that.
It's a great idea. I think it might be a whole other project, but it is a great idea. Put it on the writing list, which is about 10 miles long right now. That's good news for everybody.
Yeah, because we need things like this. There's a number of alternative books on different subjects, like to single-sex parent families, and death and dying and grief and bullying, but things like this to counteract so much of the violence that people aren't even aware that they're traumatizing their children. I'm sorry, that's called trauma, with a capital T, trauma, because it's very disturbing to their systems and their minds. Because that's what they think about the world.
Yeah, it's so important, and I always like to say that I'm not actually alone in this field. There are, a few other authors here and there, and I would love to see hundreds more authors in all age categories and all types and formats of books. I actually feel like one of the things I would love to do is to give a talk on nonviolent civil resistance for authors specifically, to expose them to the ideas that we, many of us on this call, are very familiar with active nonviolence, or becoming more familiar, but the majority of authors are not. And so I think there's some wonderful work that could be done in showing them this incredible range of problem solving, and which is plot solving basically for an author, that comes out of the nonviolent toolbox, that could really enliven their stories and actually align their stories with the reality of the world that we currently live in. We think of it as so violent, but the reality is that nonviolent struggle is happening more than ever. It's exponentially off the hook right now. And it's happening in all kinds of countries all over the world. And here in the US, we're seeing it grow and grow and grow. And I think our stories are going to have to reflect that, or they're going to be terribly, woefully out of date. People are going to read them and be like, why did they use violence? That was such a dumb thing for the characters to do. All right, more questions, you guys. We're getting into the last 10 minutes. So if you've been sitting on a question, you should pop it out now, like a chicken with an egg.
This is Ryan. One of the things that strikes me about this book is that it fills the void of kind of cultural nonviolence. That, what we're getting more and more nowadays, I think, the analytical side of nonviolence with Erica Chenoweth, and the statistics, and trying to get the word out about the real facts behind the power of nonviolence. But this book really helps to provide that heart and emotional side that is, I think, really important too, that kind of helps get people to feel and understand what nonviolence is about. So I'm really appreciative of that. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that further too, Rivera, but I mean, you've kind of been alluding to that too in some of this conversation.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the most exciting work about the series coming up, is knowing that that gap is so huge right now. I mean, we have The Fifth Sacred Thing and City of Refuge by Starhawk. We have Ursula Le Guin's Eye of the Heron, and a few other titles that very consciously feature nonviolent struggle. But when you think that thousands of titles are being published each year, and I'm not even going to talk about the movies, we have seen, again, just a few token movies about nonviolent struggle. Notably, Selma comes to mind, or Richard Attenborough's Gandhi, which was produced in the year I was born, which is long ago enough to need some others. But meanwhile, I mean, this is what I keep saying to everyone, the action, the adventure of our times is happening in nonviolent struggle. It's not happening in war-torn battlefields. That's like, even though we love the war culture, paying attention to the battles scene as the focus of our mythology is passé. The Vietnam War and the anti-Vietnam War protesters actually deserve a lot of credit for challenging that and for pushing that out of national spotlight and cultural attention. But people need a new narrative. And I believe that active nonviolence gives us that, you know, the Standing Rock water protectors really, and a lot of indigenous cultures, including my radio co-host Sherry Mitchell, you know, stand up for warriors and really keep reminding people that in many of their tribal languages, warrior is not tied together with violence. In fact, that's usually the least of the definition, if at all part of the definition. And so where are we going to turn to for our new narrative of what it means to be human and courageous and brave? Because if we dissect the war culture, there are elements that we all agree we love. There's loyalty, there's commitment, there's devotion, there's dedication, sacrifice, overcoming serious challenges, proving oneself. These are all things that the human being actually deeply loves. It's been with us since the dawn of humanity. But in the Dandelion Insurrection first, and now in the way between, what I'm trying to show is that nonviolent struggle has demonstrated in the real world that those values are separable from the violence which we have attached them to. And as I learn more about history, I actually am getting to the point where I think those values were appropriated by early conquest and warring cultures, and they were co-opted from societies that displayed them and embodied them in non-violent ways to prop up and ensure the dominance of the war and violence and conquest culture. This is very long ago, and I'm largely thinking about Europe, which is the region that I'm looking at right now historically. But one of the things that was really interesting to me is I watched the film adaptation of The Giver, which is, again, a children's book, a wonderful children's book by Lois Lowry. And there were all sorts of things about the movie I didn't like drones. But there was this moment when the boy, who his whole story is he's receiving memories, because one person in their culture receives all the memories of the past, so that people aren't burdened with them and don't make wrong mistakes. They live only in a very surface level in their world. But one person has to hold all the memories. So he holds the memories of colors and love and, you know, sledding and all sorts of things. But when he receives the memories of courage, the director did a very interesting thing. He showed a scene of skydiving, a very quick scene of whitewater rafting. And then boom, 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 20 scenes of non-violent struggle. I kid you not. That was Jeff Bridges, the director, his definition of courage. I just sat there and bawled like a baby. I was so moved, and it was so unexpected. But that's what I want to see happening more and more in the culture. And that's what I'm always working towards in the novels and the public talks and the lectures and everything that I'm up up to. Because I do believe that if we're going to change the culture, it's going to require all the arts, all the education, all the ways that we socially interact. Our myths and our stories are so important, and that it can be done. But we, all of us, in whatever field we work in, whatever way we show up in the world, have to learn, first of all, about nonviolence, peace building deeply, and then incorporate it into the work that we're doing and embody it in our lives. And that we do have quite a few levers, each and every single one of us, for starting to shift our culture, like little trim tabs on ships, as Buckminster Fuller would say.
If nobody else has a question, I have another question, Rivera.
Okay.
David? I'd just be interested in hearing a little bit about the process of writing a novel like this, or writing this novel. I mean, do you kind of do an outline of what you see the story turning out to be, or is this just as you start the book, it just grows as you go? So that's one question. And the other is the series, the things you still hope you plan to write. If you could just share a little bit about, what's still to come.
Great, good questions. So my process for each book is a little bit different. It's an evolving thing, but this one involved lots of dreaming. Lots of laying around on my floor by the fire, just imagining the scenes and the stories and writing down notes. And I knew from the beginning that it would be a series. And so I have lots and lots of notebooks full of notes on the whole series. And things shifted and transformed. I changed the starting age of Ariara several times, which changes the material you can dig into and the plots. And you can't have her falling in love in the second book if she's 11, right? Or if she does fall in love, it's a particular kind of love. And it changes the way that she deals with or triggers or catalyzes change as well. People's agency shifts at different ages. So I have lots of stacks of notes on this project, and lots of dreaming time under its belt, which I think is really important. One of the things in my work is to let the world come alive. I used to do theater, solo theater specifically. And in solo theater, you actually, project out as the actress the world that you're living in. You literally smell the smell that's blowing on the wind. And so as a novelist, I use that too. And I put on the bodies of my characters, sometimes very literally. I'll occasionally still walk around as a particular character just to see, if they have a hunched over back, how grumpy does that make them by the end of the day? They're really bright and perky. Does that cheer me up when I'm depressed? So I do some of that work in the process of writing the books as well. And then I tend to just obsessively write, and it'll go through waves. I write every morning, but occasionally a story will just really take hold and it will just make me write all day and all night. And there were times when I would wake up at 4 a.m. and just know what the scene was that I was missing in the book. Or I think I finished the first draft of the book as the full moon rose on the edge of the mesa, all sorts of wonderful, mysterious and mystical things like that. And and then I revise. Revise and edit like crazy. And I think I'm acknowledging that more, because people used to say, oh, you just channel your work. And sure, there's a process of tuning into the world of the story and writing down what you're seeing, observing, sensing, feeling, letting the story unfold in its own magical creative way. But then there's a real, there's a craft to the revision. And I think that is really helpful for people who also write to know about, to the process of pulling out the stitching of a scene and restuffing it and putting it back together. Sometimes I take a whole scene and I just change the character name and it works so much better. It shouldn't have been that character that I thought was supposed to be in there. It's supposed to be the other one. I try to have a sense of humor. Every now and then a character totally hijacks a book, and I'll write like volumes about this character and then suddenly be like, what are you doing? You are not the protagonist or even like the central side character of this book. Get out of there. You'll have your own book maybe someday. So it's actually a fairly lively process, which might get me committed to a mental asylum someday, but let's hope not. And so in response to your other question in the series, I don't want to do too many spoilers, but from the world of Monk's Hand, which is a mountain scene, they in the first book where she starts to study the way between and Azar, she then goes down to the capital in Mariana, which is a valley area. And once in the capital, she's dealing with a lot of issues around privilege, around monarchies, power and control, and also dealing with this very uncomfortable reality since Ariara is of mixed blood from the Marianan side of the equation and the desert side of the equation. There's numerous desert people who are held as what they call water slaves. They have been exchanged for water rights. And I live in New Mexico, so water rights are a huge deal here. It's not actually so unreasonable to imagine that you would have to sell somebody in your family into slavery to secure your water rights for your family. They would not do that in New Mexico, but I'm saying the pressures around water rights are very prominent. And so she walks into this extremely uncomfortable injustice that she has to navigate and has to understand what to do about. And I won't tell you what happens, but you can imagine. And then from there, in the third book, she goes into the desert. And as I mentioned earlier, the situation with the water slaves and the constant wars with the Marianans has created a gender imbalance in their society, in which the women are subservient to the men. And Ariara doesn't come from that background. In Mariana, the women are not subservient to the men. They're the powerhouses. And so her very presence starts to upend the whole situation. And from there, she goes back to Mariana in the fourth book and has a lot of encounters with class issues, which are rampant in Marianan society, and starts to really work on issues of democracy. And then in the last three books, there's another challenge around looming wars, and we get to revisit that theme from the point of view of not a young child who has just learned about the way between, but someone who has lived and walked in the practice skillfully for years now, and how does she confront that situation? And then, of course, there's always those lingering themes, which I can't tell you about because it'd be total spoilers for the whole series, that do get resolved in the 6th and 7th books.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Rivera, you, I believe I saw a statement or comment that your book has been successful in getting into the hands of some of the schools and the children. And I imagine they could do a lot of creative things like make their own drawings and posters and discussions about these characters and the approach to problem solving with nonviolence. And I'm thinking that'll just be wonderful because the traditional storyline is always so predictable. There's the protagonist and the antagonist, and they have their fight, and somebody comes out the winner. And even myself, I find going to so many movies these days. I don't go to many anymore, but it's always so predictable. No matter how wonderful the special effects are, it's sort of to me, it gets boring once you are impressed for the first 10 minutes of the special effects. That it's nothing but one battle and then another battle and more violence, and eventually somebody comes out the winner. But there's not a lot of depth to it, is there?
No, and I guess that's one of the things I'm have my eye on with this series, and most of all my work, the Dandelion Insurrection and the sequel to it that's coming out this year as well, is like we just keep saying, you know, we know there are better plot lines, literally, for humanity, and that the more the average citizen, the average person knows these plot lines and has used some of these skills, such as de-escalation or conflict resolution or nonviolent action in their own personal lives, the more successful we're going to be as human species at navigating conflict. Some of my friends in conflict studies, such as Tom Hastings, like to say that conflict is inevitable. Violence is totally optional. You know, he really brought to mind the idea that war is a conflict management option tool, and it's really not a very sensible one. It's very wasteful from like a deep analysis of that system, not to mention all the obvious horrors of war. So yeah, I would love to see what school children and groups of people do with the book next, how they apply their creativity to it. One of the things I'd love to just be so tickled to see emerge is someone who likes Aikido or other forms of martial arts, or capoeira, which is another inspiration for the physical embodied non-martial arts of Azar, to do is to try it out, see how it works, actually invent the field, make it up. I came from a modern dance background and an improvisation background, and we used to do some things that were straight out of Azar, and we would call them, you know, the empty space improvisations, where you were moving through the empty space of the other. And, you know, Aikido has certain ways of using people's momentum to bring them and yourself to a place of non-harming. Theoretically, I've seen some rather aggressive Aikido sessions. I start to watch these things on YouTube as research, but capoeira, if you don't know about it, is a Brazilian martial arts form that originally was like, you know, whack and hit, but it was outlawed by the colonial government of Brazil. And so it went underground and turned into a dance form where they come as close as possible to one another without actually touching. And they are so acrobatic about it. They'll like get on their head and their foot will go around places I don't think feet should go, and just at rapid speeds. So I know the actual real life way between physical version of Azar is totally possible. And I would love to see it happen someday. It's a project for someone out there.
I would just like to encourage everybody to remember about your Book of the Month club and all the work that you've created, that people can, don't forget, make recommendations to your local library to purchase the books. And in fact, I did that with this book to our library. And then the other interesting thing, I'm kind of new to Kindle, but it's fascinating that with Amazon, you can download a sample, and it appears that it downloads the first 3 chapters, and it allows you to take a look, and then, of course, you're going to get sucked into the story, and then you'll want to buy it. I just thought I'd comment about those things.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up the libraries, because the other thing about the libraries is it's a really great social justice action on economic justice as well. Oftentimes when I have someone write to me that they can't afford a book, we'll talk about, you know, can I send one to your library so you and everyone else in this situation can afford a book? Or they'll ask a friend to buy a copy and then donate it to the library as well. And I lived on the local libraries growing up. The public library is like the bedrock of my literacy and therefore my writing. And so I cannot say enough in support of the public library system and supporting them in any way, shape, and form that you can. Definitely. So friends, we are getting actually over our allotted time of an hour, but I want to just check in and see if there's any lingering questions that those who haven't spoken and asked lots of questions might still have. We'd never want to end the call without hearing from you. All right, so we have resolved everything, as John Deere likes to say. And I just want to thank you all for joining us on this call and for tuning in, listening, sharing your thoughts and reflections and questions. And please do read David Hartso's book. You will completely enjoy it. I did. I have a copy here and a much belated review to post. And talk about someone who's actually like lived the way between. It would be very interesting to go from reading the fiction to reading David's real life story and seeing the parallels between those. Yeah. You want to say anything, David?
No, I just want to thank you for today, and I'll look forward to talking with people next month. And we should set a time because I think the original date you gave me won't work. But so
Okay.
We'll do that soon.
Great. We'll check in about that.
Okay.
And special thanks to Ryan Hall and Pache Bene, Campaign Nonviolence, for hosting these calls in the whole series. It's
9 people.
a great way to engage people in these conversations. So
Thank you, Rivera.
thank you all, and good night.
Good night.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.